welcome to this panel titled Border Walls in Africa and Asia. My name is Mirza Zulfiqur Rahman, and I'm joining in from Assam in India. I'm a member of the scientific committee of the Border Walls and Borderlands conference, which this panel is a part of, organized by the UQAM. This panel will have 5 presentations by scholars working on borders and border walls in Africa and Asia, followed by comments by me, and a discussion will follow after that. Without further ado, we will start with Hakan. Okay, I will request you to start your presentation, and if you have a presentation to share, please note that your time is 10 minutes, but I will give you a reminder at the end of 10 minutes. Thank you. Hakan, you may.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and greetings from Turkey in Ankara. I hope everyone is doing well. I will be talking about border walls, especially Turkey's wall. But first of all, I would like to clarify one key topic. I'm sure most of you know that Turkey demanded the United Nations to change its name from Turkey to Türkiye. And therefore, I will use Türkiye in my presentation as well. I want to share my presentation plan. As you can see, I will first make a short introduction about border wall, and then we will make an overview of Türkiye, especially on migration policies. And then we will look at the border walls built on Turkey's borders and being surrounded by walls. And finally, we will seek an answer to the question of whether walls work. First of all, let's take a look at the world map. You will see a lot of red lines on the map. And as you might guess, these lines are border walls. Yes, there are quite a lot of walls, this huge number, and continue to increase due to the border policies of the states. You can see this more clearly in this graph. As you can see, there are 7 border walls in 1945 and 15 border walls in 1989, and then 77 border walls in 2019, and I don't know in the future. You know that there has been a border wall race between states, this race, especially in the last 10 years. Unfortunately, Turkey also participated in this race, as I will talk about in the later stage of the presentation. So, for what reasons are border walls built? Why states build border? Let me clarify at this point here. As you can see, 33% of the states say they are building a wall against migration. This is a very important point for me, especially terrorism and smuggling follow migration, but for Turkey, migration and terrorism are the main reasons of the built border walls. I need to talk about the Turkey, an overview. Turkey's 8 border neighbors: Syria, Iraq, Iran, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Bulgaria, and Greece. Turkey is transit and destination country for migrants, especially transit country. Turkey hosts the largest number of the refugees with about 4 million people. This number reached 7 million with irregular migrants. And the most important point, the most walls built on its borders. And Turkey, with most of its walls on its borders, but not all. The walls built by Greece and Bulgaria also make Turkey a country surrounded by walls. Let's to look at in the more detail. Turkey has built an 80,337 kilometers wall on the Syrian border. This wall was completed in June 2020. There is a 500-kilometer wall on the Iranian border, and 295 kilometers of it has been completed. This wall is especially for migrants coming from Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. On the Iraqi border, there is a 43-kilometer wall planned, but 16 kilometers of which has been completed. Finally, there is a 15 kilometers wall planned on the Georgian border, but it has not started yet. I guess it started next week. In addition, Greece had previously built a 40-kilometer wall on the Turkish border. They announced that another 120-kilometer wall will be built. And finally, Bulgaria built a 146-kilometer wall on the Turkish border. As a result, the length of the walls built on the borders of Turkey reaches 1,700 kilometers. When all the walls are completed, Turkey will be a walled country, unfortunately. And I would like to end my presentation with a question whose answer is obvious. The walls work. I think the answer for most of us is no. I hope no. I hope we can see a world without walls and migrants' deaths. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Thank you, Hakan. We will proceed to Ankita Bharadwaj now. Maybe you could also introduce yourself a bit before you start your presentation and then continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mirza sir. So hello, myself Ankita Bharadwaj. I am presently pursuing my PhD from the Department of Political Science in Dibrugarh University, that is in Assam in India. So the paper that I'll be presenting myself today is based on some of the ideas that I have had during my field visits in the India-Myanmar borderland. So therefore, some of the ideas are still not in shape and it will take time. However, the title of the paper goes Walls and Fences, Rematerializing the India-Myanmar Border and Borderland. So here I'll be looking into mainly the physical realities of the present borderland between India and Myanmar and the implications of setting up border fences and in what ways these fences have an effect on the border communities. And also I'll try to look into that if possible, smart walls can be an alternative to secure the India-Myanmar border. So my presentation, I have tried to, combine it into 5 parts. So firstly, understanding the India-Myanmar borderland. So conceptually, a borderland is a space between 2 borderlines, a space where we can see negotiations and confrontations. So as we see, most of the borderlands in South Asia have been either as a compromise or out of negotiations. So the India-Myanmar borderland, as I have understood till now, is a transnational coexistence space where we can find there are various intermeshed structures of cross-border ethnic linkages and also the presence of paramilitary forces which protects the territorial limits of the state. So it is an interplay of complex and vulnerable structures of the border communities and governance systems and the communities who have not still adapted to the post-colonial consequences of the colonial borders. But at the same time, this borderland also defies and contradicts the whole idea of a modern state, which rests upon that, the modern state has to have territorial limits and to protect its population. So with globalization, the physical or the hard borders, which we see, have lost much of its appeal. So, so the argument, till now in border studies, we have seen that fortified borders, like building of fences or walls, is one of an answer or a solution to the undocumented infiltrations and migrations which we see in the India-Myanmar borderlands. And also on the other hand, it's a very open and a porous border, and which is also perceived as an opportunity as well as a security threat. So the borderland of India-Myanmar is both a problem as an opportunity at the same time. So the porous border between the two nations have been used by various insurgent groups, various drug trafficking networks, and arms smuggling networks. And also, if to protect these borders or to secure these borders, a barrier is to be created, then it would also hamper the age-old ethnic ties, which are unhindered since a long time. So now coming to the second part, what are the problems that we could see at the India-Myanmar borderland? Firstly, the demarcation itself of the India-Myanmar border itself is a very big problem which you could find in the region. So over the night, people, the tribes which were residing along the border found their families, their fields, their houses straddling on two different sides of the border, and it was an imposition rather than a practice of security. So this imposition over time has created many spaces and conditions for ethnic expulsions, breakdown of political orders, the flow of refugees, threats, and demands for further territorial divisions at the regional levels. For example, like the quest of Nagalim or the frontier Nagaland. So militarization of the India-Myanmar happened after in the 1960s and 70s, when the tensions of border claims were happening simultaneously in the India-Pakistan borders as well as the India-China borders. Also at the same time, because of the insurgency and because of the growing trafficking and smuggling, militarization was seen as a common solution to secure the border. Moreover, another problem was a very hidden contradiction between the governance mechanisms. The tribal societies, like back in the India-Myanmar borderland, are an asymmetric power systems which are still based on the traditional governance system. These were quite in contradictions with the state-imposed governance structures. So these were some of the problems which were there, which still are there in the borderland, and which makes this borderland very vulnerable and very complex at the same time. So coming to the third part, that is, what are the various steps or effort taken by the Indian state to contain the security threat and securing the border? So the first approach which the state had taken was a very institutionalized approach, was the arrangement of the free movement regime. So this regime actually gives the villagers or the people in 16 kilometers border area to cross the border without any visas or passports. So, and also there were various counter-insurgency operations, like the most famous one was Operation Sunrise. But however, efforts like this were actually, which were there to secure the borders, actually did not secure the borders, but instead they have escalated various resistance movements and also the demands for the unification of the cross-border minorities. Then the state came up with the idea of fencing, which emerged from basically two reasons. The first one is political and the second one is from the security. So the security perspective, building of fences was seen as a solution to end the continuing violence which was happening in the region. As well as on the same parallel scenario, the political reason was that if India's northeastern borders are not stable and secured, then the whole idea of successfully implementing the Act East policy would be a very vague thing. So, however, there were very drastic impacts of fencing in the borderland. The people have been quite opposed of it. And especially if we take the case of Manipur, where the fencing had first started in like 2003, we could see that people were like protesting against it. Their main like issue was that like if the fence like which was supposed to be created is more of like a security fence rather than a border fence, and because of which like they were totally of the idea that they would be deprived of their maintaining of the ethnic relations. They will be deprived of their livelihood, their produces which were gained from the agricultural fields which were spread along the border. So materializing this whole fencing thing was not like a proper solution to the problems which were there in India-Myanmar borderland and which were transnational in nature. So now coming to the fourth part, there needs to be a different approach of rematerializing the India-Myanmar border. And here I propose the concept or the idea of smart walls. So smart walls can be seen as a systematic and organized approach to deal with the security issues. And also on the other hand, like it is a concept which does not require physical barriers, which will also allow the people-to-people exchanges which have been happening in the border. So that is why like smart walls can be, and smart walls can also be viable or feasible in this borderland because of the rugged terrain that is there. Most of the borderland has been covered with like forest and the mountains, which are very difficult like even to access. So that is why smart walls can be seen as an alternative concept. Now coming to the fifth part, what is the role of the border communities in rethinking this border management? So any kind of like, installing a new infrastructure or coming up with a new solution to the problem will always be successful only when the people who will be dealing with it or affected by it are taken into concern. So the first and foremost thing like which can be done is that the government agencies can take the help of the local populations, the local leaders. They can identify the routes from where the insurgents can come, or the drug networks can be identified and certain actions can be taken accordingly. Also, the other thing is that the shared ties that like we are so proud of with the people who are residing along the borderland, this should be used as a link. This should be used as an opportunity to link to the Southeast Asian countries, given the fact that India is very desperate in implementing Lucas policy. So Lucas policy and the Act East policy. So people-to-people exchanges are one of the most basic element in this whole policies, and this is one of the area where smart walls can actually help in enhancing the relations as well as protecting the whole borderland. So this is where I completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ankita. I will now proceed to presentation by Ankur Sharma. Ankur, please give your introduction and then please start. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ankur Sharma. I'm actually just finished my PhD from Department of International Relations, South Asia University. Greetings to everyone who is present today, and thank you to the organizers for this opportunity. Now, my topic is fencing an open border, analyzing the Indo-Nepalese antagonistic actions over Kala Pani border dispute through securitization theory. Now, this is a case study within my PhD. So I would definitely appreciate suggestions and constructive critique with regards to it. Now, Ole Weber and Barry Buzan have pioneered the securitization theory, and it is associated with the Copenhagen school. Now, I'm going to briefly explain what is securitization theory by actually paraphrasing the explanation given by Ole Weber himself. Now, according to him, there is no natural things out there that are security threats and others that aren't. It is us as communities in which we label certain things as security problems. So more specifically, this form of labeling happens in a process. A securitizing actor would say that this particular thing is an existential threat, and we have to act upon it, and therefore it is legitimate to do something that we as a community wouldn't otherwise do. A relevant audience, upon hearing what is called the speech act of the securitizing actor, may say that they accept and agree with his or her statements. This relevant audience then grants the securitizing actor the right to use extraordinary measures. Now, in this situation, a referent object is depicted by the securitizing actor as whose existence is being threatened, and therefore an extraordinary measure is required for it to survive. This referent object could be the existence of a nation, or it could be the form of freedom or any form of social welfare mechanism. It is an aspect that people are willing to say that this has to survive and exist. Now, once the audience has agreed that this particular aspect has to survive, then extraordinary measures can be justified to being used by the securitizing actor. Now, a very simple example of this would be of Donald Trump as securitizing actor, who made immigration into the United States as something that threatens the existence of what is basically to be an American, and an extraordinary measure of building a wall is therefore required to safeguard America. Many people in the United States who basically voted for him ended up agreeing with this rhetoric. Now, an important aspect in this is the audience itself. Now, according to Ole Weber, it is not necessary for the relevant audience to be the people themselves. The relevant audience can be very different depending on what kind of issue it is, what kind of political system a country has. In autocratic countries like North Korea, only a handful of people may be needed to be convinced. It is therefore a crucial event when the relevant audience is convinced, because it is at that point a particular issue has changed into a securitized issue. That particular issue then attains urgency as it has to be solved, and measures to solve it have to be taken in priority. However, this also means that further discussion about the issue would be considered as a waste of precious time, and extraordinary measures must be taken urgently. Ole Weber asserts that securitization theory can be used in different ways and in specific case studies, such as to study the escalation of a conflict. It can help in analyzing how actors on one side started to depict an existential threat from the other side and justified extraordinary measures. And apart from this, it can also help in analyzing why old security issues suddenly get into the security framing and how to also desecuritize it. So I basically use the securitization theory to understand the Indo-Nepal boundary dispute. So the boundary between India and Nepal is based on the Treaty of Segolie that was signed in 1816. It was a treaty that was signed between the British East India Company and the Kingdom of Nepal after the defeat of Nepal in the Anglo-Gorkha War. There were also subsequent treaties and agreements that were signed between both of them to further delineate the boundary. Now, in the western sector, which is basically Nepal's western boundary with India, the treaty specified the Kali River as the boundary between the East India Company or the territories of the East India Companies and the Kingdom of Nepal. Post-independence, India and Nepal also carried forward with the treaty as a defining marker for the boundary. So India and Nepal, after India's independence, continued of marking the Kali River as the boundary between both the countries on the western side. However, the treaty did not specify the origin of the Kali River, and this particular alignment had become an issue between both the countries. India claims a small river that runs to the south of Kalapani as the origin of the river, while Nepal claims the source of the Kali River lies at Limpudara, which is to the east of the Kalapani area. Hence, the Kalapani area and Lipu Lake and Limpudhara lie to the east and therefore belong to Nepal, while India claims otherwise, that Kalapani, Lipu Lake, and Limpudhara lie to the west of the Kali River and therefore are territories of India. Now, after India's independence, this territory has been and is currently a sovereign part of India. This particular territory also contains an important Lipu Lake Pass. It is used as a pilgrimage by both Indian and Nepali pilgrims, both Hindus and Buddhists, towards Kailash Parvat and Mansarovar Lake and other holy sites that are located in Tibet, China, or Tibet, which is now a part of China. Now, what has happened recently is that the main catalyst for the escalation of conflict was that India inaugurated a road in 2020 through the Lipu Lake Pass that connected India with Tibet in China. Nepal was already protesting the project. However, after the inauguration, Nepali government under the former Prime Minister KP Oli undertook an extraordinary measure. The Nepal's parliament during the COVID-19 lockdown approved a constitutional amendment that provided for a new Nepal map that included Lipu Lake, Kalapani, and Limpudhara as Nepali territory. Now, this was not there before. The earlier maps of Nepal did not show these territories within the territory of Nepal. But after this, in 2020, they made sure that these three territories are depicted within their map. Subsequently, these actions by Nepal caused a major uproar in India, especially in media and social media. It was escalated by actions within Nepal and India by fringe actors. There was also deployment of police forces and other actions that were not seen in the Western sector or basically at the Indo-Nepal border otherwise. It was, however, the borderland population that are located in the Kalapani area that have been more guarded of protecting the cordial relations that existed between India and Nepal. They're what in securitization theory would be referred to as desecuritizing actors. Now, in a brief and simple explanation of securitization of this escalation, KP Oli, or the former Prime Minister of Nepal, KP Oli, as a securitizing actor, was able to convince the relevant audience during the COVID-19 lockdown. In this case, the relevant audience would be the Nepal's political parties and members of the Nepali parliament, that the road by India at the Lipu Lake Pass is a threat to Nepal's sovereignty, and an urgent extraordinary countermeasure is therefore required urgently to oppose it. The members of Nepali parliament agreed to this rhetoric and as such agreed to undertake an extraordinary measure, that is of forming a new map that would include the disputed territories within a new map of Nepal. Securitization theory is therefore capable of explaining a particular question that is asked about this dispute, as to why Nepal undertook such a measure now and never before, and why the Kalapani dispute escalated to the extent that it did in 2020. Apart from this, I also want to touch upon the securitization of the Kumani ethnic nationalism. Now, you need to know that the territory of Nepal, that Nepal has basically claimed, is resided by an ethnic group known as Kumani. These people have faded historical memories of being under the Gorkha rule in the past, which they refer to as the dark phase of their own history. Some within this ethnic group also consider that the Treaty of Sigoli partitioned Kumaon's territory, whereby the certain parts of east of the Kali River was also resided by the members of the Kumani ethnic group. But these areas were given to Nepal by the British East India Company. But it never became a political issue in India, since the movement of people and goods across the border, basically across the Kalapani area between India and Nepal, was always free. You could, there's a famous term in India, roti and beti ka relation. Basically, it means that the movement of even family marriage relations between the borders, across the border from India to Nepal, has always been free. And however, after 2020, when the new map was formed by Nepal, a section of the Kumani people, especially the elites within the community, have opposed what they consider as cartographic aggression, if I use Sanarkan Sen's term, that Nepal has claimed of Kumani territory within India. So we do find that the borderland population within this region were acting both as securitizing actors as well as desecuritizing Africa. All right, this would be the end of my presentation. And I've given a brief understanding of what my chapter in my PhD, or basically my case study in my PhD is like. And I would definitely welcome suggestions and critique with regards to this.
Thank you, Ankur. I would now invite Élodie to give a presentation. Élodie, please introduce yourself and then continue with your presentation.
Je suis Élodie Tsague, doctorante à l'Université Dschang, Cameroun, à la faculté des sciences géopolitiques, filière sciences politiques. Et mon sujet est le suivant: murs frontaliers et contrebande en Afrique centrale. Une analyse à partir de Djibouti à la frontière entre le Cameroun et la Guinée équatoriale. Alors, il faut dire qu'en 2019, la Guinée équatoriale a entrepris d'ériger un mur le long de sa frontière avec le Cameroun. Ce petit État, d'une superficie de 28 000 km², partage avec son voisin, le Cameroun, qui a une superficie de 475 444 km², une frontière longue de 180 km, dont la localité de Djibouti, au Cameroun, se situe à l'intersection de la frontière commune. La construction de ce mur, qui avait pour but de limiter l'immigration clandestine et la contrebande, est apparue paradoxalement aussi comme un facteur stimulateur de nouvelles stratégies de contrebande. Alors, notre travail sera structuré en deux parties. Nous allons voir d'abord en grand 1 la construction d'un discours légitimateur du mur en question. Et en grand 2, nous allons questionner l'efficacité de ce mur face au développement de la contrebande. Alors, la construction du discours légitimateur du mur. Il faut voir ici l'ensemble constitué des intellectuels, les hommes politiques, les organisations de la société civile qui ont essayé de produire un discours à travers les médias pour convaincre l'opinion publique de la nécessité de construire ce mur qui apparaît selon eux comme la solution idoine pour défendre l'intérêt national du pays, c'est-à-dire de la Guinée équatoriale. L'intérêt national donc qui passe par la sécurisation du territoire ou des frontières. La construction de ce discours légitimateur se fonde sur des arguments qui ne sont pas a priori discutables, à savoir les mobiles économiques, notamment la baisse de l'activité économique basée sur l'économie pétrolière. Il faut dire que, jadis pays pauvre, la Guinée équatoriale a découvert des gisements de pétrole au début de la décennie 90, suivi de son exploitation, a drastiquement changé le visage de la Guinée équatoriale. Le pétrole a en effet contribué à créer l'image d'un Eldorado, parfois qualifié de Suisse d'Afrique, en raison des recettes générées par l'exploitation du pétrole, ce qui a fait de ce pays un pôle d'attraction pour les étrangers, et en particulier les Camerounais. Or, les ressources naturelles n'étant pas infinies, on note à partir des années 2015 une chute libre de l'activité économique consécutive au tarissement des puits de pétrole. Conséquence, le pays réfléchit alors sur la manière de partager le gâteau national uniquement avec sa population et non plus avec les étrangers. On a également les mobiles sociaux, notamment la réduction de l'immigration clandestine. Il faut dire que grâce à la manne pétrolière, les recettes générées par l'exploitation pétrolière sont devenues abondantes et l'argent circulait à flot dans ce pays qu'est la Guinée équatoriale. C'est alors que le pays développe et exerce une force d'attraction sur de nombreux Camerounais qui y affluent à la recherche d'une vie meilleure en offrant des services divers dans ce pays riche, notamment la maçonnerie, la la réparation, la construction automobile, la menuiserie, la plomberie, j'en passe. Un autre argument avancé par la société civile et les intellectuels, c'est le désir de sécurisation du territoire. Alors ici, il faut savoir qu'en 2017, la Guinée équatoriale a essuyé une tentative de coup d'État à l'occasion de la célébration à Mengomo, dans le sud du pays, et l'anniversaire de l'accession du président Théodoro Obiang Bazogo à la magistrature suprême. Les mercenaires et le matériel de guerre avaient transité par Kiossi pour atteindre ce pays. Et le président Théodore Obiang Bazogo, se sentant alors en insécurité, réfléchit dès lors sur les voies et moyens à mettre en œuvre pour la sécurisation de ses frontières internationales qui passent par le projet du mur. Et il faut ajouter à cela que l'entrée officielle de la frontière commune entre le Cameroun et la Guinée équatoriale est fermée depuis 2019 et du côté de la Guinée équatoriale. Donc, au Cameroun, au niveau du Cameroun, la frontière est ouverte, mais la Guinée équatoriale, la frontière est fermée pour des raisons de contrôle des flux humains et économiques et commerciaux, ce qui a généré le phénomène de contrebande au niveau de la frontière commune. L'une des solutions donc pour réduire cette contrebande a été la construction du mur. Le discours sur le mur a été suivi par des actes politiques, notamment la mise sur pied des infrastructures, dont la réalisation d'une route goudronnée le long de la frontière et la construction du mur, également la construction des miradors pour surveiller le territoire à travers la frontière. Alors, la question est de savoir si l'érection de ce mur a-t-elle réduit la contrebande. Nous allons donc voir que le mur est une mesure à efficacité douteuse face au développement de la contrebande. Il faut dire que la construction du mur à la frontière camerounaise et Guinée équatoriale a accentué plutôt le phénomène de contrebande, notamment la localité de Kiossi est devenue une plaque tournante de la contrebande. En effet, l'érection du mur, au lieu de réduire la contrebande, a plutôt contribué à sa progression. Et la localité de Kiossi a vu l'émergence d'un port qualifié de port sec, puisqu'il ne s'agit pas d'un port normal. À première vue, il s'agit d'un petit port, d'un petit ruisseau reliant le Cameroun à la Guinée équatoriale. Et la grande partie des produits de contrebande qui transitent qui de la Guinée équatoriale pour le Cameroun, et ils ont construit des vins, des liqueurs, des produits cosmétiques, des huiles végétales, du carburant, et approvisionnent en grande partie les villes environnantes, notamment Ambam au Cameroun, les villes de Bolova et de Yaoundé, la capitale du Cameroun. Et à partir du Cameroun, les produits qui transitent pour la Guinée équatoriale, il s'agit essentiellement du sucre, de la farine et des livres secs. Alors, face à ce devant de la contrebande et avec la présence du mur, les contrebandiers ont dès lors développé des stratégies d'adaptation, notamment le développement de la corruption. Phénomène social par excellence, la présence du mur a accentué la corruption à la frontière Cameroun et Guinée équatoriale, liée aux difficultés de traverser librement à la frontière comme par le passé. Ainsi, les contrebandiers et les agents des services de l'État à la frontière se livrent à des pratiques corruptives d'envergure à l'entrée officielle de la frontière commune. Notamment, l'entrée officielle commune est appelée la chaîne, ou au niveau du port de Kiossi, comme nous l'avons dit tout à l'heure, mais aussi dans les endroits où sont postés les éléments des forces de défense et de sécurité. Une autre stratégie de résilience développée par les contrebandiers, c'est l'intensification même de la contrebande. En effet, la contrebande est accentuée par la présence du mur dans la mesure, où les contrebandiers, dans leur désir de vouloir traverser la frontière avec leurs marchandises, ont développé des stratégies de contournement à travers la création de nombreuses pistes de brousse à l'effet de couler leurs produits de l'autre côté de la frontière. Donc la frontière est vraiment changée de piste de brousse. Il faut toutefois souligner qu'en dépit de cette intense activité frauduleuse, les agents de la douane de Kiossi au Cameroun essaient tant bien que mal de saisir quelques cargaisons de contrebandiers. Puisque nous sommes allés au bureau principal des douanes de Kiossi, nous avons récolté quelques statistiques de janvier à juin 2022. C'est vrai que je ne peux pas donner cette statistique puisque ça y est d'un tableau que nous avons eu à récolter là-bas. Les marchandises saisies de janvier à juin 2022 par le bureau des douanes de Kiossi sont d'une valeur de 28 787 132 francs pour une amende s'élevant à 10 445 000 francs. Bon, il faut dire que ces chiffres sont toutefois relativisés dans la mesure où une bonne partie des produits de contrebande échappent au contrôle douanier, tout comme de nombreuses pratiques de corruption sont observées par les agents des douanes. Il faut également développer comme une autre stratégie le sabotage des installations et les traversées nocturnes. Donc, devant l'obstacle que constitue le mur, les contrebandiers sont amenés à développer des nouvelles stratégies pour atteindre leur but, notamment la destruction des infrastructures, en vue de trouver une issue pour lui permettre de traverser la frontière la nuit. Bon, en conclusion, nous dirons tout simplement que l'édification du mur par la Guinée équatoriale au niveau de sa frontière avec le Cameroun, au lieu de réduire à sa plus simple expression le phénomène de contrebande, a plutôt contribué à son accélération à travers notamment de nouvelles stratégies de résilience qu'ont développé les contrebandiers, notamment la corruption, le contournement du mur et les traversées nocturnes. Ce qui porte à croire que le mur est une mesure à efficacité douteuse dans la mesure où il n'a pas produit des effets escomptés. Merci de votre aimable attention.
Thank you, Élodie, for your presentation. Now, I think we have only 4 presenters today. I think the 5th one could not join because of some technical issues. So what we plan to do now is to actually go backwards, maybe. And I would now like to invite Adrian to actually discuss Élodie's paper, and then I will continue in context of this panel, and then I will continue with discussing the remaining 3 papers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mirza. So I will offer my comments to Élodie in French as she's presented her paper in French. But then if you want, I can also summarize it maybe in English beforehand so that everyone has an understanding of what was presented.
Yeah, before just to sum it up, and also maybe you could also sum up what others presented for her as well.
Perfect.
As well, yeah.
So, Élodie, je vais résumer votre papier en anglais, puis ensuite je vais vous offrir mes commentaires en français. So Élodie's paper focused on the border between Guinea and Cameroon, where she looked at the border wall that has been erected as a response to trans-border contraband and illegal movement of goods. And her paper presented a very good historical overview of how the border came to be and how the wall has been erected. And her research question was whether or not the wall actually impeded this trans-border illegal exchange of goods or not. And her conclusion is that rather than lessened the contraband across this specific border, the border wall led to adaptation strategies from criminals and actually intensified the contraband across this specific border. And so not only has the wall not done its purpose, but it actually increased the problem. Donc, Élodie, votre papier offre un excellent historique de l'évolution de l'enjeu. Vous avez vraiment une profondeur d'analyse de l'évolution du mur à la frontière entre le Cameroun et la Guinée équatoriale. C'était vraiment très intéressant de vous écouter et d'entendre cette historique-là. Votre question de recherche est très intéressante et construit un peu là, sur les questions de recherche qu'on voit habituellement sur les questions de migration. C'est-à-dire qu'on voit souvent la question, est-ce que les murs fonctionnent par rapport à la migration? Mais rarement on le voit par rapport à d'autres types de flux transfrontaliers. Donc, c'était vraiment intéressant de vous entendre sur poser cette question de l'efficacité des murs par rapport à la contrebande dans ce cas-ci. Et votre réponse à la question également est très claire, très bien étayée. Vous présentez bien les stratégies d'adaptation des contrebandiers, l'intensification de la contrebande qui vous mène vers votre conclusion que au lieu de réduire ces effets de contrebande, le mur a plutôt contribué à son développement. Pour la suite, de ma perspective, et je ne suis pas experte des frontières en Afrique, mais deux éléments que je voyais qui pourraient être intéressants de développer dans de futurs projets ou en lien avec celui-ci. D'une part, c'est de faire ce lien-là entre le fait que votre question de recherche, en fait, est liée aux questions qu'on pose habituellement sur les enjeux migratoires, mais de le voir dans une perspective économique. Donc, j'aurais trouvé intéressant que vous fassiez ce lien-là pour situer davantage votre question dans la littérature et dire, par exemple, on pose souvent cette question par rapport à la migration. Nous allons tourner la lentille et la poser plutôt vers les questions économiques. Dans un second temps, ce qui pourrait être intéressant et ajouter une profondeur théorique à votre papier, ce serait d'aller vers des politiques comparées, donc une analyse comparée entre le cas que vous avez très bien étayé ici du Cameroun et de la Guinée équatoriale et de l'amener en parallèle avec d'autres frontières où on voit ce même type de discours être mis en place d'un mur pour contrer la contrebande. Et je cite ici deux exemples rapides, Haïti et la République dominicaine, ou la Colombie et le Venezuela. Donc, on a ce même type de discours que vous nous avez présenté qui se répète dans ces pays-là. Et si vous voulez élargir la portée de votre recherche, je vous suggère là, de vous tourner vers peut-être de l'analyse comparée.
Merci, madame.
Merci beaucoup pour votre présentation et I will give the microphone back to Mirza for comments for the other papers.
Thank you. So I would thank you for your presentations and I would like to discuss briefly, going backwards again, Ankur Sharma's presentation. And I think it's very interesting in the sense that how you have presented through the lens of securitization, the Indo-Nepal border. One thing that, that strikes us also in the sense in the recent developments that have been seen during the COVID-19 pandemic as to how the pandemic time also has been used by nation states in order to further do a sort of map making, in a sense, also in terms of building roads, building border walls all across South Asia, and using that kind of a space, kind of a intervening time period where some of these issues were not being able to, be participated well by civil society or all the stakeholders because of the extraordinary situation that was necessitated by the COVID-19 pandemic. When you talk about securitization, I would like to ask you another question. Maybe you could address it later in your comments about how securitization also can, the same speech act can also be seen as an opportunitized action as well. And how it could be a flip side of the, a securitization narrative. There could also emerge an opportunitization narrative in terms of how border walls can be also seen differently, and infrastructure building along borders could be seen differently in that context. And also, I would also maybe ask you to also reflect a bit upon, interestingly, about how nation states, when they act outside the normal bounds of their political procedure, in terms of these securitization initiatives along borders, is it a very, very typical South Asian, is there a typical South Asian context in which you will situate this case study? Is there any learning that other regions can have? And also another aspect that I would also like to point out towards is about the aspect of tri-junctions, in a sense, because it is also, when you talk about India-Nepal border, that it also is a very, very important tri-junction in context of India, Nepal, and Tibet, for example. So how does this tri-junction narrative operate in this? Because South Asia and Southeast Asia is as also Ankita's presentation later on also describes, these are very important tri-junctions. So how would you look at that narrative and how it is framed by different stakeholders in that context? So thank you for that. And going to Ankita's presentation, again, very nice, nicely done. And I would have also, in terms of how you talk about communities straddling borders and the perception and the worldview of communities inhabiting these borderlands and how they navigate and negotiate these borders on an everyday basis with stakeholders, and how this has over time been militarized and also carrying forward the baggage of the colonial mindset of border making in this region. You also talk about, talk about insurgent groups, trafficking, which Élodie also has mentioned in the context of her presentation, and also in terms of how Hakan also had mentioned earlier in his presentation, in terms of the informal and the illicit networks that operate across these borderlands. And Hakan, for example, initially had showed a global map of border walls, which if I look at the India-Myanmar borderland, I think it's somewhat inaccurate in many ways, because many of these India-Myanmar borderlands are not fully fenced or not fully completed with a border wall, but it is still marked in red all across. But there are very, very small patches which have been done. And these patches also determine as to how border walls, the existence of border walls or the non-existence of border walls depends upon the navigating and the negotiating capacity of borderland communities with the state, as to how ethnic communalities and also ethnic solidarity across these borders can determine their resistance to these border walls. So in that context, I would also like to ask you to reflect upon maybe how these patches of borderlands are, and some examples maybe that you could maybe bring about in terms of how these very borderlands also contain very, very important pilgrimage routes, trading routes, traditional migration routes, which have actually formed the identity of communities across Nagaland, across Assam, across Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur, and the larger context in the subnational context as well. And another thing that you also talk about is about how demarcation has been a very, very important facet. That most of the India-China borderland or the India-Myanmar borderland has not been demarcated on the ground very much well. So in that sense, there is also this sense of fuzziness that is present. and that also runs counter sometimes to regimes which the Indian state, for example, wants to put in at the borderlands, such as the continuation of its activist policy or the lookies policy earlier, and as to how maybe it is important to also see how the Indian state looks at borders and how communities look at borders. For example, the communities have their own worldview of borders straddling across spaces, geographical spaces, but how the nation state also, comes, for example, I was mentioning in the piece of Ankur's paper that during the COVID pandemic, the Indian state also went ahead in various parts of Northeast India to actually go ahead and build these fences where there was community resistance. So the Indian state sometimes talks about the activist policy of opening up borders, but first they have to create the border wall, create an infrastructure of control, and then only open it up for exchanges, economic exchanges. So I think that presents a very fascinating way of how you look at border walls, where a tight control mechanism by the Indian state has to be put into place and then reopen up. And it also ruptures a lot of traditional, community interactions. And I agree with you also when you say about the fact that local borderland communities can be connectors, the cultural connectors towards strategizing for a larger activist policy approach or the lookies policy approach. I think Hakan also has dropped out, maybe due to some technical problems, but I think his presentation also was interestingly focused on similar issues in terms of how Turkey's borders, are determined, and interestingly how Turkey itself has constructed so many different border walls, and the majority of the border walls has been constructed by Turkey itself in order to actually contain its territorial limits, and for various regions in terms of how it is geographically located in a very, very important geographical region, in context of the straddling Asia and Europe, for example. So in that sense, its orientation of being a transit kind of for a transit borderland, in a sense, brings in context of a lot of migratory routes, so it also is present in context of a larger Asia, and also is true of the African continent in terms of the flows and exchanges that we see in larger the global south, for example. So I think I will end here and maybe invite each one of you to maybe reflect on as ending comments. Maybe I will start with, I think, Élodie, and then Ankur, and then Ankita. Yeah, thanks.
Non, j'ai apprécié votre analyse de votre parti pris, votre regard objectif. J'en prendrai compte lors des prochaines rencontres. Merci.
Merci.
Yeah. Ankur, yeah, briefly, if you could respond. Yeah.
Thank you for the comments, Mirza. One aspect that I would actually like to touch upon is with regards to it being a tri-junction. So a large part of India and Nepal's dispute with regards to where the Kali River starts is based on the archives that are located with the British and within India and within Nepal. Now, what had happened within Nepal, the archives was burned when there was a transition from the monarchy to you could say the government that came after it. India has a lot of archives, and similarly so do the British, where there are conflicting ideas of where the Kali River starts and how they interpreted the Treaty of Sigoli with regards to the origin of the Kali River. The importance of Tibet and China come into this because they have a lot of archives with themselves, which they have not released. And China has, for most part, taken a stand back approach to this, and let's gone forward with India in saying that let's build the road through the Lippu Lake Pass and let the people come. And they have de facto recognized it as Indian territory because they have been continuing trade and everything. But it's hard to trust their intentions with regards to this because it can be overturned later on. And secondly, they do have archives which they have not released, which can either support or neglect both India and Nepal's claim. And similarly, they've not allowed the Tibetan archives to come out with regards to on how the trade through the Lippu Lake Pass was conducted prior to the Treaty of Sigoli, on how whether this region, as claimed by the Kumaonis, was their pass, or as claimed by the Bhutia communities that it was their pass. Bhutia is basically a community that has a lot of strong trade relations with Tibet. And in that way, they could actually take a strong sense on deciding the outcome of this issue. If they do release, or if they intentionally release certain types of archives.
Thanks so much, sir. And maybe we can, I think we have another presenter. I think briefly, Ankita, you could respond, and then maybe we'll go on to Azzeddine, who has joined us later with his presentation. But first, Ankita, you could just respond, and then Azzeddine will go. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for the comments. I mean, like, those will be like, those are really nice, and like, that will be like really helpful for me. But then, like, out of all the presentations and like, you know, everything what I have heard today, like one thing I have understood is that from different, like, you know, observations was that somewhere, like, you know, all these like control infrastructures and all this, like, you know, building of fences or building of walls, it should be something like which, you know, revolves around the people like who are affected by it or who are supposed to be dealing with it. So we have like, you know, the causes as like insurgency or, you know, like drug trafficking and everything. But then we also need to look on like why these problems are happening. Maybe demarcation of the border was one of the reasons like why this has led to insurgency, especially in like the India-Myanmar case. So somewhere, you know, like re-looking and rethinking about the whole idea of like why we, on the first thing, why we need a wall. So, and like, you know, if we are trying to counter some of the problems, so why these problems have like come up. So this is somewhere like, you know, one needs to rethink the entire state's perspective and purposely like decenter state from the whole narrative of borders. So this is something like I have understood. Thank you so much.
Ankita. Yeah. Azzeddine, your presentation, maybe we have 10 minutes. You could continue with your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry again about the miscalculation of time. So I go directly to the topic. I will speak today about the Spanish border walls and the Moroccan borderland in the light of three concepts. The first is the securitization, the second is the surveillance, and the resistance. In my intervention, I will try to provide a general overview of the genealogy on one of the Spanish border cities on the African country, and describe the building processes of an iron wall and the emergence of border society on Moroccan territory. This will pave the way to investigate the socio-economic dynamics resulted by these borders, which influence borderlanders' daily lives. In addition, I will shed light on the experiences of youth who are attracted by this borderland from other countries, with a special focus on the COVID-19 context. The period of closure of Moroccan-Spanish border crossing / fences in the context of COVID-19 crisis appears to have marked a decisive moment in the history of borderlands. In the context of COVID-19, there has been a great transformation in the structure and organization of the border wall and borderland in Melilla and Nador. While raising this wall to 7 meters was a major step towards reducing the waves of Africa's people, the most important step was the transition to the smart border system and the approval of the return of those who penetrate the Melilla border. More than a year after the closure of the border crossing between Nador and Melilla, attempts to immigrate continue to occur irregularly, despite the decline in the movement of people and vehicles border crossing. So I would speak about Melilla, the city and the society in Melilla. By de facto, Melilla is a Spanish city in the Moroccan territory. Its status is dialectic and hybrid. Historically, is used to be the site of contention between Morocco and Spain. Moreover, it is one of the last occupied territories along with Ceuta and Palestine in the Arab region. In his book, Honor and Baraka, Traditional Social Structures in the Reef, Raymond Jamus speaks about Melilla as a problem, considering the status of Melilla poses many paradoxes. The city that is situated 10 kilometers away from Nador is characterized by Spanish design, although it is located in Moroccan territory. Furthermore, it is a region that belongs to European Union despite its existence in an African country. When we look a little toward the past, what will attract us is that this city has been at the heart of Moroccan-Spanish relations, as far as its border wall that surrounds the city and its height, which goes beyond the border wall between the United States of America and Mexico is concerned. It puts the globalization discourse and the myth of global village in stock and bring to the fore the legacies of colonialism and its role in the demarcation of the cartographies of the global south. With time, Melilla became a destination for some Moroccan people searching for work or international migration in the Reef region. Spanish Melilla neighbors the impoverished Reef of Morocco. This proximity fuels tension, which we shall explore by tracing the genealogy of the wall of Melilla as a European border in the north of Africa. To accomplish that, we shall explore the everyday life of people, subsisting border experiences on such as migration, displacement, in the time of COVID-19 and beyond. In 2019, Sancho Abascal published a book that contains dialogue instigated by the right-wing populist with journalist Fernando Sanchez Drago to discuss the schedule which the leader of the Fox Party intends to implement during his presidency of the Spanish government. Among the decisions he will take in case he is elected is building a border wall between Melilla and Morocco, similar to the border wall which Trump wanted to construct in order to separate United States of America from Mexico. The Fox Party has pressured the Spanish government to strengthen the military defense mechanism of the maritime island, such as the Balearic, the Boran, Burjil, Chafarinas, the Canary Island, Ceuta, and Melilla. These measures are being implemented primarily to reduce the flow of irregular migrants and people who infiltrate to Europe through Melilla and Ceuta. This is escalated surveillance of the border by the Spanish state, for example, was initiated by Frontex. And Frontex, it is an organization founded in a context where immigration in Europe has become a security problem. The organization was founded on 26 October 2004 to support European Union cooperation in connection to external borders due to the increasing flow rates of irregular migrants and the expansion of this union. Therefore, the organization's main objectives were limited to the surveillance of the Mediterranean borders. In this vein, a large number of young African who strive to migrate have become closed borders, difficult of or unattainable visas due to the policies of Union of State that dominate transboundary ranges to the extent of fencing the Moroccan land with barbed wire, surveillance cameras, lights, and detectors as for Melilla. These walls are equipped with long-distance radar, thermal photo camera, dark and infrared visuals. This had led Spanish writer Juan Guichisolo to make a comparison between the border wall in Melilla and the border wall separating the United States of America and Mexico. What is noticeable is that migratory attempts have become a maritime destination, along with attempts to jump on the iron walls that Spain has worked in the context of COVID-19 to lift and strengthen them with the smart border system, nor that the decisions of Spain Constitutional Court suffice to prevent young people from penetrating the Melilla wall. In late 2020, the court approved a law whereby migrants who entered Melilla by jumping their land borders or penetrating their maritime boundaries would be returned. The daily observation of attempts to penetrate borders wall and border crossing shows that these attempts did not stop in the context of COVID-19, which prompted Morocco to close its international borders that included the border crossing between Nador/Morocco and Melilla/Europe. These attempts also witnessed a change at the level of means used to implement them. Besides, collective border jumping among young men, especially swimming, was used even in sewage pipes. In the context of the closure of border crossing and the worsening of the diplomatic crisis between Morocco and Spain, young people tried to exploit the volatile security situation defined by the border barriers between Nador and Melilla along the lines of Tetuan and Ceuta. In the face of the collective attempts that Moroccan youth have occasionally begun to carry out, border control forces have used various means to prevent these collective attempts along the wall from Aitensar to the extent of freeing bullets in this area. This is the context in which Ceuta was living in great turmoil because of the presence of young Moroccan who arrived in mid-May. I'm gonna to finish, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation, and also it ties in very well with what we have actually seen in earlier presentations as to how the COVID-19 pandemic was used by nation states as somewhat to deploy both securitization and narratives, as well as from their context, the nation-state context, in terms of border wall, implementing context, a kind of opportunity for them to actually intervene in spaces that they were not been able to, intervene for a long period of time. And I think that the use of various forms of technology, as Azzeddine has pointed out, adds to many layers into how border walls are perceived by people. And he also presents a very, very interesting phenomenon about how the youth look at such technology and how navigating these borders in modern, in these times. So in that context, I think it becomes very interesting as to how borderland communities navigate border walls through different forms of technology, and how surveillance and control is dominating lives of borderland people across the global south. And I think and that also sums up very well this panel. I think due to the lack of time and overshooting of the time, I think we should close this. But I think we now maybe it was a very rich discussion, and I think there will be more opportunities in the future, maybe for this panel to exchange views with each other. Maybe the organizers can, connect them and encourage them to maybe write papers from a global south context, taking the COVID-19 pandemic maybe as one thread, which could be interesting for future, this interdisciplinary and cross-cultural understanding of borders across Africa, Europe, and Asia. I think, and that would actually definitely contribute towards the literature of border studies. Thank you so much for your time and your listening.